All right. So the basic idea behind this podcast would be to describe sort of what's changed in the last 50 years and how you have to adjust your basic strategy in life to account for what's different. So that's why the title would be What Not to Do. It's going to cover some pretty normal subject matter like the difference between the college situation then and now, and some of the more esoteric stuff like what investing in gold. Should you do it? Should you not do it? So, kicking things off, I suppose what I'm assuming about the audience is that it's going to be people similar to me and younger. So that even though I'm not excluding, women, minorities, or whatever, for the most part, we're talking to people who are white, male, and younger than 35. So we'll say between 15 and 35. And these would be people who are trying to figure out what to do with their lives and why and how, because the typical strategies haven't been working. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just relighting my cigar.
Okay.
I guess I could just add that, we'll also be talking a little bit about career, maybe post-college even, and then also, a lot of the college, but then also just general career. And then also I have a decent amount of advice on financial and investing, and that's where what you said about the gold might come in, although, it's definitely a very complicated thing. I think we can simplify that significantly for the people who are listening to this.
I would rather generalize the very top level stuff, and then give, if possible, give resources like if somebody wants to look more into it.
Okay.
All right. As far as that goes, it would be so let's start with the basics. Like what was it like and what's different? So back in the day, the basic expectation of a person's life is that they would do as well as they could, in school, maybe make some mistakes, maybe have one small run-in with the law or something. Then you would go to college. You would pay your way through college with a minimum of debt. And then you would go on to some middle-class career and find a girl, maybe in college, maybe just after college, and settle down and have a family in the suburbs and, switch from your liberal politics to conservative politics because you have to pay taxes now. And that would segue into your productive life between the ages of 25 and, we'll say, 55 as you progress in your career. So this was am I coming through okay with that?
Yeah, everything's getting picked up perfectly. In fact, even if it's just absolutely horrible, I can mangle the audio. Don't worry about that. Okay.
So that was the basic life plan. It was sort of a moment frozen in time because that's not that's not the typical historical scenario. It was the 1950s was a very small period of time where that was the sort of life plan for everybody. But that's when the baby boomers grew up, and so that's the sort of a working assumption of everyone because they're a very solipsistic generation. So that myth has sort of percolated into the youth, and I think less so with Generation Z than with millennials. But even to some extent, this is sort of the baseline template from which everyone else deviates when they're describing the templates for how a person's life is supposed to progress. So some of the most important differences between then and now are, well, first of all, the intellectual and social elites that we have today don't even make a pretense of trying to create a sustainable society. They're actively weaponized against the population that they presumptively serve. And so what comes with that is a series of very intelligent traps that are set up along the way to sort of filter people out and catch them in different forms of debt. So college would be a good example of this. It's weaponized against the average college goer to trap them in debt serfdom and we'll say, indentured servitude for the rest of their lives, and there isn't a trade on the other end of that, because typically before, if you were caught in indentured servitude, you would at least be able to assume that you were worth more to your master dead than alive. That's no longer the case. There's no intention to keep you alive in order to milk you for all that you're worth. So it used to be the case that you could plan on your masters keeping you alive so that they can milk the cow for all that's worth, even if you did find yourself in some form of debt slavery, and that's no longer the case. We've moved from a milking the cow strategy to a dairy farm strategy in society to a slaughterhouse, because demographics has been weaponized for the next form of warfare. So what that means is that there are a lot of these traps that are set up along the pipeline for a typical person's life, which have to be avoided now, which didn't before. And college is the best example of that, with the student loan debts and we'll say majors that don't add economic value to you as to the people that you're trying to get employed with. So now that we have a basic idea of what's changed, and I suppose all of this becomes moot if, as some people are predicting, me included, we go through a massive restructuring of the world in 2033 or so, due to some war or economic stagnation or something. But even if that happens, it's a good idea to be up on this stuff, because you at least have a template to draw comparisons from and distinctions from, versus you're just going out into a completely different world. You have no categories for the things you're describing, whether they're the same or different. So we don't know if college will still be a thing if there's an economic breakup afterward, or if it will be more of a thing, or what have you. But it would be a good idea to at least articulate what we know about the current situation, so that afterward it will be easier to articulate the differences.
Right.
All right, so those are the two major things that are different. There's disruption on the horizon, and the pipeline is actively designed to destroy you now, versus before it was just actively designed to enslave you. And I suppose we can talk about what you need in general terms, and then talk about what some of the pitfalls are. So, generally speaking, what people want is out of life is very similar from person to person, even though they might, you might think of yourself as more of an individual. You express yourself differently. You have your own personality, but typically people need about $50,000 income to be happy. That's just what research shows. So there are a lot of similarities, and though what people want is well described in what we think of as the middle class, in terms of just overall traits, right? A middle class person makes either $50,000 or more, or if you're aiming higher than that. See, most people are trying to get into the middle class or better, and they're starting from the middle class or lower. So that's why it's such a really easy archetype to work from, is that the idea of the white picket fence and all that, because that's everything that you understand as being middle class is a good description of what you need to be happy. So working from that, most people are coming from that background or worse, trying to get to that or better. And the way to do that is you look at the sort of 7 major areas of life, and you try to describe what is necessary and then what you need to obtain those. So the easiest example is income, and probably the most important. In order to make $55,000 a year or better, you probably need to go to college, but not necessarily. You have to be smart either way, because there are a lot of pitfalls. And there are also just a lot of things that you have to avoid, which are disastrous. But that we can cover that after kind of the basic description of what you need in order to be happy. So the major areas of life are personal. So that'd be your personal development, your your hobbies, your self-development, just the things that make you happy. You can think of that as your personal life outside of work, outside of family, outside of church. So that's your personal. There's family. You gotta have your family affairs in order. Your social life has to be good, so that's another big area of life is having friends. Your religious life has to be in order, and that breaks down to a couple of components. You have to be doing well in your career to be happy. If you aren't, then you won't be happy. And I'm forgetting two. I'm trying to find my...
the financial.
Yeah, you have to be doing well financially. I have a picture of this somewhere. This is what happens when you don't prepare. Just try to go off the top. There it is. You have to have your finances in order. You can't be in debt and be happy. And that is not obvious to somebody who's younger, but it becomes more obvious when you get older because it's a form of slavery. You can't be a slave and happy. Oh, and intellectual. You actually do need to develop your mind or you're not going to be happy. All right, so let's break those down. The most important nowadays, which was not before, is actually the religious side of things. So the reason for that is we've had sort of a cultural breakdown that was not... It wasn't so endemic even 2 decades ago. There was at least even our secularism was based on a Christian, a lot of Christian assumptions, like you ought to be good to the people around you, which those things are broken down under the nihilist critique. So there are a lot more pitfalls in that area. Big pitfalls that can be easily avoided because they're new and they just aren't something that people have on their minds so much as like the financial ones. So you can break this down into two major components: the spiritual side, the search for meaning, and simple religiosity, which would be your observation of rituals and just social mores that give you a sense of belonging to a larger culture. So, in spiritual terms, one of the biggest pitfalls is putting off the existential questions that everybody needs to answer in life, which is, why are we here? What does it mean to be good? What does it mean to act right in society? Is there life after death? Is there a God? And it's a mistake to put these off, but people do because we grow up with a materialist set of assumptions in our society, which says that these aren't real questions. Even though they still eat away at you, we assume that there is no meaning to life, and then while you're distracted because you don't have that mortal fear of death, you don't address them. And if you put that off until the end of your life, you're going to find yourself, wondering at the end, well, what was the point of it all? So it's going to lead to it's going to lead to an existential crisis, and that can hit you either at your darkest hour. Maybe you're having a crisis of some other sort. Maybe you've got a family member who's in a bad medical situation. They're in a lot of pain, and you suddenly start needing to ask yourself religious questions, and you don't have any answers. So it's that's a big pitfall. It's going to be major source of uncertainty. It's going to freeze you when you need to be strong. Maybe you find yourself in a wartime situation, and they say there are no atheists in foxholes, and that's because you need these sorts of questions answered at the most critical times. And so that's a big part of the religious experience that is absolutely necessary to human flourishing, which is it's laughed at, it's degraded in the modern world, and this is a major pitfall that isn't discussed enough. Is the simple search for meaning, whether it's through books or through experiential types of searching, it's something that people they either ignore it or they go overboard and neglect other parts of their lives during some sort of existential crisis. Maybe they have a phase where they're searching for themselves in their 20s or something. It's something that you really ought to be doing at least once a week in a concentrated way. And usually this sort of thing would be done in church, but that's more and more a diminishing aspect of just civic life.
Right. And I think I'll cut in here and say that, well, it's probably not true of the group of people who might be listening to this. It is true of normies that they supplant the search for meaning with basically they put happiness as the top ideal, and so then everything else is structured around achieving happiness. And I just wanted to say that happiness is absolutely not the big ideal. It's meaning, and you get meaning through deep relationships with other people. That's really the most common one you're going to find. And then the other one is just actually achieving good things, doing good things that actually benefit for at least a moderately significant period of time. It really does make you feel good. So I think that's all I had to say.
Yeah, I would say you can further break down that spiritual component of religion into moral action toward other people in the world and moral action within the context of whatever you describe the moral universe as being. And I'm trying to be kind of syncretistic here by not making things explicitly Christian, but I mean, if you were talking about it in the Christian context, that would be your difference between acting toward other people within the church and then the outside world, and also your actions within what God tells you to do.
Yeah.
So this would be your own personal connection to either the moral law or God himself, depending on how you view these things.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be explicitly Christian, but it's worth noting that many of these ideas are, by their nature, these Christian ideas, the best possible things that can be done. Because that's how they're defined, is, you need to determine what is the best course of action for everyone across all times, periods, and all that shit. And, there's just no way to be better than that. So even if you don't believe anything about the Christian religion, you just want to throw the whole thing out. If you want to be a good person, I mean, that idea, maybe it's not just a Christian idea, but it is a big Christian idea. So the ideas themselves are very valuable. Don't just throw it all out, bro.
Right. It's impossible to ignore your conscience entirely, presuming you have one and you're not a psychopath, and also be happy and feel fulfilled.
Well, can I spurg? I don't ever spurg, but I'll do just a little bit. What, that Inuyasha post you made? I actually read that when I was really young. So I knew, in detail what you were talking about with all that. Because my sister read it, it's not like I just picked it up. But anyway, I mean, it is true, though, that a lot of men have this desire, and getting rid of weakness is good. Becoming a strong person is good, but there is sort of this dark desire to basically become a psychopath. And when you understand what happens neurophysiologically in the brain as you accumulate power, it really is basically analogous to becoming a psychopath. You lose empathy. I mean, like in a deep, actual physical way, you lose empathy. You start having double standards. Like you'll get really mad when people do something, but if you do something, it's different. Like this is what power does to people. And anyway, I just wanted to say that it's interesting that both physiologically and philosophically, there's this drive to become a psychopath. Because it's easier, it's simpler. Oh, you don't have to worry about anyone else. But it's not good.
I didn't know that. The neurophysiological side of that would be making interesting podcast of its own.
Yeah, so that would be the winner effect, which I've linked to a million times in my posts, but
yeah. All right, I'm going to move on to the religiosity side of things, but only touch it just barely, because it's really just a conclusion drawn from social science. People who attend church or religious service weekly do better than those who don't. They're happier and more functional. So even you got to have some sort of religious influence in your life. You got to have some sort of connection to a religious community, and regardless of your feelings on Christianity. So that's absolutely essential to living a good life. And the fact that we've removed even any form of civic religion from the basic structure of a person's life is really damaging to people. So you absolutely need that, and that's one of the major pitfalls that can keep you from not even flourishing. It will degenerate your life and destroy you. All right. I'm having some severe connection issues. Are you getting out?
Oh yeah, I've gotten. There hasn't been any, anything go wrong for the last, except for the last time I said something. I think it's gone wrong on this end.
Okay, you're because it sounds to me like you're cutting out about a quarter of the time, so I was unsure.
Oh well, is it me not being close enough to the microphone? Does this help?
That might be it, honestly.
Yeah, I'm just assuming that it picks up, but maybe it doesn't. All right, well I'm closer now.
Okay.
So you want to talk about college stuff now?
Yeah, colleges are the biggest one, so I wonder if we should go into that at the end, because it's easy to get off on rabbit trails. I suppose we can break it down based on like what happens to most people, especially my generation. I think Generation Z is going to be less so. But what happened with millennials is they tell you, you're gonna die in a gutter if you don't go to college, because it's the only way to get any sort of job that pays a livable wage. And you should take as much debt as possible, because debt is good. Debt is a tool. And you can do whatever you want and still get a job with your college degree, because it only matters that you have the letters after your name, not so much what the specific degree is, because the skills generalize. So all of these are untrue. And I'll start with the first one, although it's sort of true. The idea that you can't get a livable wage without a college degree is based on so there are two things that you actually get from a degree, typically. One of them is status and inclusion into a sort of union, which is enforced by HR departments, which will typically not consider anyone's application unless they have a college degree. And the other is actual valuable economic skills with some sort of specialty which can add value to somebody's business. The reason that you get status from going through college traditionally was because it was a signal of your pre-existing virtues, your intelligence and your ability to work hard. And those are really the two things that any employer wants in varying measures for whatever the job function is. They want you to be able to pick things up quickly. That's your intelligence. And they want you to be able to work hard and add value to their bottom line, whatever that happens to be. So they're filtering for IQ and conscientiousness, whether that's learned conscientiousness or inborn, because that's one that is susceptible to training, versus IQ is primarily hereditary. The ability to get some sort of economic value from college, which you can apply to somebody. So this would be your particular...
Oh, you just cut out. Yeah, so we just had to abandon that because Skype wasn't working, and we moved on to the next podcast. So maybe we'll revisit it, or maybe Aioli will finish it himself as a podcast or as a post. But in any case, I think that there was enough information and enough presentation of the problem at hand that this is, a podcast that was worth listening to, worth putting out. So I hope you enjoyed it.